The laugh was the first thing. Not a loud laugh, but a small, polished sound meant to dismiss. It came from the man in the charcoal suit and the head of the conference table. He had a clean shave and a watch that cost more than the truck the man in the back of the room had driven here. The man in the suit, the bank's attorney, smiled at the developer sitting to his right. He didn't look at the man who had spoken, tell them to stop this sale. He had said it from the doorway, his voice calm and even. Not loud, but it had cut through the room's low murmur. The branch manager, a nervous man named Peterson, had frozen with a pen hovering over a signature line. Now, all eyes were on the man standing by the door. He wore work boots, clean but scuffed at the toes. His jeans were faded, his shirt a plain blue cotton, pressed and neat. He held a long cardboard tube in one hand, dust on his cuffs. The attorney finally turned his head, the smile still fixed in place. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone suggesting he was anything but. "We're in the final stages of a private auction. This is a closed meeting." The man in the doorway didn't move. "I know what it is. That's why I'm here." He took a slow step into the room. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and expensive cologne. The developer shifted in his chair, annoyed. The realtor who had brokered the deal glanced at her phone, then put it face down on the polished mahogany. A silent vote of impatience. The attorney's smile tightened. "Sir, whatever your concern is, it needs to be addressed through the proper channels at a later date. Today, this transaction is being finalized." He gestured to the papers in front of Peterson. "The parcel isn't yours to sell." The man said it again, same tone, same quiet certainty. This time, the attorney's smile vanished. He looked at the bank's security guard, a heavy man standing near the credenza. But the man who had spoken was not a threat. He was simply a fact that had entered the room. He was calm, older, his face weathered in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with weather. His name was Arthur Vance. He placed the cardboard tube on the corner of the long table. It made a soft, hollow sound. No one else said a word. The room went quiet. To understand why Arthur Vance was standing in that room, you have to go back 3 months, to a kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in late March. The house was quiet. His wife Mary had been gone for 2 years. The silence was still a weight he was learning to carry. He was sorting through his father's things, not because he had to, but because he had finally found the strength to. His father, John Vance, had died 7 years prior, and the boxes had sat in the attic, monuments to a grief Arthur wasn't ready to inspect. John had been a man who saved everything. Receipts from 1970, warranties for appliances long since turned to scrap, letters from his brother in the war. He was a man who believed in records. Arthur worked methodically, one box at a time. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was just performing a duty. In a dusty shoebox labeled Property Docs and Taxes, beneath decades of paid tax bills and old survey maps, he found it. It was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper, folded in 3. It was a certificate. At the top, in ornate lettering, it read, "Certificate of Severed Mineral Rights." It was dated November 5th, 1965. The document specified a parcel of land, Parcel 7B, a long, narrow strip of 40 acres that ran along the old creek bed at the back of the farm. It stated, in clear typewritten language, that John C. Vance had purchased, for the sum of $8,000, all rights to the minerals, stone, oil, and gas beneath that parcel, in perpetuity. The surface rights, it clarified, remained with the original farm property. The certificate was signed by the president of the county bank at the time, a man named Henderson, and embossed with a notary seal, crisp and clear after nearly 60 years. Arthur read it twice. He didn't understand its full significance, not yet. He knew the farm had been sold. His father had been forced to sell the main property, 200 acres, back in the recession of 1988. He'd fought to keep it, but the bank had been relentless. It was a wound his father never spoke of, but which Arthur saw in the way he looked at the fields that were no longer his. The bank had foreclosed and sold the land to a holding company. Over the years, it had changed hands a few times before being bought by a new developer with plans for a subdivision. But Arthur's father had never, ever mentioned this certificate. He had never spoken of selling the mineral rights separately from the land itself. Except the certificate said he hadn't sold them. It said he'd bought them. The next day, Arthur drove to the county courthouse. It was a solid stone building, cool and quiet inside. He went to the records office. A woman with greying hair and glasses on a chain looked at him over the high counter. He explained what he was looking for. Deeds, filings, anything related to Parcel 7B from 1965 onward. She nodded, her expression neutral, and pointed him toward the archives. For 3 days, Arthur Vance sat at a long oak table, scrolling through microfiche, his eyes gritty from the strain. He pulled the heavy ledger books from their shelves, the pages smelling of dust and time. He traced the history of the land. He found the original deed for the farm. He found the bank's foreclosure filing from 1988. The document was thick with legal language, but the description of the asset was clear. It listed the parcel numbers, the acreage, the boundaries. It described the land, the surface. There was no mention of mineral rights, none at all. He kept digging. He found the record of the certificate's filing, recorded on November 10th, 1965, 5 days after it was issued. It was there, a clear legal entry in the county's official memory. The rights had been severed. They had been sold to his father. They had never been rejoined with the surface deed. The bank, in its foreclosure, had taken the house and the fields. They had taken the surface. They had not taken what was underneath. For 28 years they had owned a property they did not fully understand, and now they were trying to sell it. His father had been a quiet man, the kind of man who planted trees he knew he would never sit under. He'd grown up during the Depression, and it had left a mark on him. He trusted hard work, not promises. He trusted paper, not words. Arthur remembered him at the kitchen table, the same one Arthur now sat at alone, with a small metal box and his ledgers. Every Sunday night, his father would balance his books. He paid his bills the day they arrived. He kept every receipt. Some men collect problems. He collected proof. Mary used to joke about it. "If the world ends," she'd say, "John will have the paperwork to prove it was properly scheduled." The farm had been his father's life. Not the money from it, but the soil itself. He'd walk the fence lines every morning, a mug of coffee in his hand. He knew the dip and rise of every acre. When the bank took it, something in him broke. He didn't talk about it. He just got a job at the local grain elevator and worked there until he retired. He never set foot on that land again. But he kept the boxes. He kept the records. Arthur remembered one conversation, years after the foreclosure. They were fixing a fence on the small plot of land they still owned, the one with the house. Arthur had been angry, talking about the unfairness of it all. His father had just kept working, stretching the wire tight. He finally stopped, wiped his brow, and looked at Arthur. "Some things aren't for now," he'd said. "Some things are planted for the next man." Arthur hadn't understood him then. He thought he was talking about the fence post they were setting. Now, sitting in the quiet of the county records office, he understood. His father had known about the certificate. He had known he still owned a piece of that land, the most essential piece. He had held on to it. A quiet, patient act of defiance. It wasn't about revenge. It was about holding a line. It was about the truth of a thing. The land, Parcel 7B, was unremarkable, a stretch of rocky ground thick with scrub oak and cedar following the creek. For years it was just a buffer zone, but a recent geological survey commissioned by the developer had changed that. The survey had found a massive deposit of high-purity silica sand running directly beneath that parcel, the kind of sand used in manufacturing, in glass,
in technology.
Suddenly, the worthless creek bed was worth millions. The developers' plans for 100 houses were a cover. Their real interest was the quarry they planned to open once the land was theirs. The local paper had run a small article about the survey's findings. That's what had sent Arthur to the attic in the first place, a flicker of memory, his father talking about the creek bed. Just a feeling, a loose thread he felt compelled to pull. Holding the certificate, Arthur felt the weight of his father's patience. 28 years he had waited. He had known the bank had made a mistake. He had kept the proof filed away in a shoebox. He had planted something for the next man. Arthur was the next man, and it was time for the harvest. Back in the conference room, the silence stretched. The attorney, whose name was Collins, finally broke it. He composed himself, adjusting his tie. "Sir," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I have in my possession a fully executed and recorded deed. Our title is clean. We have a title insurance policy that confirms it. The bank has held this property since the foreclosure in 1988. He spoke the year like a weapon, a declaration of settled history. Arthur Vance said nothing. He simply unrolled the certificate from the cardboard tube and laid it on the table. The paper was thick, the edges yellowed, the typewritten letters were faded but clear. He didn't push it toward Collins. He just left it there, an island of history on the sea of polished mahogany. Collins glanced at it, then back at Arthur. "What is this supposed to be, an old piece of paper?" "Mr. Vance, the chain of title is unbroken." Arthur finally spoke again, his voice still quiet. "Your chain is for the surface rights only." He tapped a finger on the certificate. "This document severed the mineral rights in 1965. My father, John Vance, purchased them. They were never part of the foreclosure asset because the bank never owned them. They were never yours to take, and they are not yours to sell." Collins let out a short, sharp laugh. "A prescriptive rights claim. That's what this is." He walked over and looked down at the paper, not touching it. "That won't hold up. The bank has acted as the sole owner of the property in its entirety for 28 years. We've paid the taxes. Our ownership has been open and notorious. Any prior claim was extinguished by our uninterrupted possession." It was his second argument, the legal theory. He was on comfortable ground now, citing doctrine. He looked around the room as if giving a lecture. "It's a settled matter." Arthur didn't argue the legal theory. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound notebook. He opened it. He also pulled out a small stack of receipts held together by a paperclip. "My father paid the property taxes on the mineral rights assessment every year until his death," he said. He slid one of the receipts across the table. It was a county tax receipt from 2015 for Parcel 7B mineral assessment. Amount paid, $47.50. I have paid them every year since. He slid another receipt, this one from the previous year, with his own name on it. Your possession of the surface was not adverse to our ownership of what's underneath. We were never dispossessed because you never owned it. We have the tax records to prove it. A continuous, unbroken line of payment on a separately assessed asset. Your title insurance covers the surface. I imagine if you read the fine print, you'll find an exclusion for mineral rights not explicitly named in the deed. They almost always do." The room was silent again. The developer was no longer looking annoyed. He was watching Collins, his expression hardening. The branch manager, Peterson, was sweating now, a sheen of moisture on his upper lip. Collins's confidence was gone. It had been replaced by a flicker of something else. Uncertainty. He had built his case on an assumption that the file in front of him contained the whole truth. He had never considered that the real truth was in a shoebox in someone's attic. He was a man who read what was given to him. Arthur Vance was a man who read everything else. Collins cleared his throat. He tried his third and final argument, an appeal to reason, to pragmatism.
Look, Mr. Vance, he said, his tone softening, becoming more conciliatory. Let's be reasonable. This development is a major investment in the community. It's jobs, it's growth. What you have here is a procedural artifact, a technicality. The spirit of the foreclosure was for the entire property. Everyone understood it that way. He was pleading now. Don't let a 60-year-old piece of paper stand in the way of progress.
He was making it about the town, about the greater good. He was making Arthur the villain, the old man holding back the future. Arthur looked at him. For the first time, a trace of something hard entered his eyes. It wasn't about progress, he said. It's about a silica quarry. You weren't planning 100 homes. You were planning to tear up that land, grind it down, and haul it away. My father loved that land. The part you want to destroy is the only part he managed to save. So no, it's not a technicality. It's the only thing that matters. He paused. You can't sell what you don't own. The finality in his voice was absolute. There was no more room for argument. The three pillars of the bank's case, the deed, the legal theory, the appeal to pragmatism, had all crumbled into dust. The developer finally spoke. His voice was low and tight. Is he right? He wasn't looking at Arthur. He was looking at Collins. Is that certificate valid? Collins stood frozen. He was an attorney for a regional bank, not a specialist in mineral rights law from the 1960s. He had no idea. I would have to consult with our title experts. It's highly irregular. I'm confident in the bank's position, but his voice was hollow. Confidence had left the room. Peterson, the branch manager, saw the deal and perhaps his career evaporating. He wrung his hands. We can clear this up, he said, his voice strained. Let's verify. He looked around the room, desperate for a solution. The county registrar, Eleanor Vance. No relation, he added quickly. She's been there 40 years. She knows every parcel in this county. Let's call her. Let's just ask her to look at the documents. The developer nodded, a single sharp gesture. Make the call. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Arthur's life. Peterson made the call on speakerphone. His hand trembled as he dialed. He explained the situation in halting, deferential tones. A woman's voice came over the speaker. It was calm, dry, and unimpressed. The voice of someone who had seen every kind of dispute the land could inspire. Send me a fax of both documents, the bank's deed and Mr. Vance's certificate. I'll look in the archives. She gave them the number and hung up. The silence in the room returned, but it was different now. It was the silence of a waiting room. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights seemed loud. Collins paced by the window, his back to the room. The developer stared at the certificate on the table as if it were a bomb. Arthur Vance sat in a chair against the wall. He didn't look at any of them. He looked at the cardboard tube in his lap. He thought of his father. He had done the work. He had followed the facts. Now, all he could do was wait. The waiting was its own kind of work. The patience his father had taught him. The fax machine in the corner whirred to life, spitting out a single page. Peterson hurried over to it. He read it, and the colour drained from his face. He walked back to the table and placed the paper down without a word. The developer snatched it up. It was a short typed memo from Eleanor Vance, the county registrar. It read, Re Parcel 7B. Records confirm mineral rights for said parcel were severed from surface rights by a recorded filing on November 10th, 1965. The purchaser of record for mineral rights is John C. Vance. There is no record of these rights having ever been reconsolidated with the surface deed or subsequently sold. The bank's foreclosure claim from 1988 pertains to surface rights only. The 1965 certificate appears to be the controlling document for subsurface ownership. At the bottom, she had signed her name. That ended it. The neutral verifier had spoken. The quiet competence of a county clerk had dismantled the confident assumptions of a corporate law department. The truth wasn't in their thick, glossy file. It was in a heavy, dusty book in a courthouse basement. The developer read the memo twice, then slowly folded it and placed it in his breast pocket. He looked at Collins. His expression was cold. This has been a waste of my time. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the room without another word or a backward glance. The realtor gathered her things and scurried out after him. Now it was just Arthur, Collins, and Peterson. The air was thick with failure. Collins finally turned from the window. He looked exhausted. His professional mask had shattered. He looked at Arthur, and for the first time he saw him not as an obstacle, but as the man who had beaten him. His tone changed completely. There was no condescension left, only damage control. "Mr. Vance," he said quietly, "clearly there has been a significant oversight. On behalf of the bank, He stopped. He knew an apology was useless. He switched tactics. "The developer is still very interested in the quarry. The silica deposit is valued at over $12 million. The bank is prepared to facilitate a sale. We can make you a significant offer, right now, for your rights. A settlement. To make this right." He was talking about money. It was the only language he had left. He thought a check would solve it. He thought that's what this had been about all along. Peterson chimed in, his voice hopeful. $1 million. The bank would guarantee it. Right now, we can draw up the papers. Arthur Vance looked from one man to the other. He saw their desperation. They still didn't understand. They thought this was a transaction. He slowly stood up. He walked to the table and carefully rolled up the certificate. He slid it back into its cardboard tube. He capped the end. He turned to them. "They're not for sale," he said. It was all he needed to say. It wasn't a negotiating tactic. It was a statement of fact. This wasn't about the $12 million. It wasn't about the money at all. It was about a strip of land by a creek. It was about a promise his father had quietly kept. It was about a debt owed to a memory. He walked out of the conference room, leaving the two men standing in the ruins of their deal. He didn't look back. He walked through the bank's marble lobby, his work boots making soft, solid sounds on the polished floor. The security guard watched him go, his expression unreadable. Arthur stepped out into the afternoon sun. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel angry. He felt a quiet sense of rightness, of a line held, of a record corrected. The auction was over, done. He got into his old truck, placed the cardboard tube on the passenger seat and drove home. The world looked the same as it had that morning, but it was not the same. A small, crooked thing had been made straight. That evening, Arthur Vance didn't sit at the kitchen table. He took a walk. He went out to the edge of the small property he still owned, the fence line that bordered the land the bank had sold. He couldn't go on to Parcel 7B, not legally, but he could stand at its edge. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields. He could hear the creek from here. He uncapped the tube and took out the certificate. He held the old paper in his weathered hands. He ran a thumb over his father's name. He stood there for a long time, the wind moving through the tall grass. He wasn't looking at the ground, wondering about the $12 million in sand beneath it. He was looking at the trees his father had known, the curve of the creek his father had walked. He was seeing the place as his father had seen it.
a piece of home. He carefully rolled the certificate and put it away. Some things are planted for the next man. His father's words came back to him clear as the evening air. He understood now. He was the next man, and the harvest was simply this, a quiet moment at a fence line, knowing a promise had been kept.
Arthur Vance's fight was over a piece of paper from 1965, a quiet truth held patiently for decades. But not all truths are written on paper. Some are carved in stone. In a small town in Arizona, a new highway project is about to unearth a set of boundary markers nobody has seen since 1922. Those stones tell a very different story about who owns the water in the valley, a story the state government thought was long buried. We'll see what the stones say. Stay with us